All right. Well, good evening, everyone. If anybody is even out there watching, though. But welcome to the stream. My name is Randy Ekman, and I am the owner of Stretch Your Mind Entertainment, a small production company based in the Houston area. Um, and I have been, I actually, I had been doing streams for a little bit about kind of this topic, which is how do you prepare for recording or producing live events of various kinds. um, and the last stream I did was about this time of year 2 years ago. So if you were watching at that time and following along and wondering, well, what happened? Well, um, a lot of things happened. So the original stream series that I was doing was leading up towards this very big gig where I was going to be doing not only audio but also video live streaming of a big concert that was being put on by a couple organizations in the area. And it was going to be my first time doing doing one of these big gigs that I'd set out to do years ago, and this is the first time that I was going to be able to actually do it. So since the last stream, life had just gotten busy. My day job, because this is not my day job, my day job had started to take a lot more of my time, and then as the event got closer and closer, it just was like I just gotta buckle down and do the thing. And I didn't really have time to worry about streams because there was a lot of panic of like, how am I going to get all the audio and the video working and everything. And then we got to the the rehearsal before the event, and that was the day that the derecho passed through Houston, a really bad storm that did a lot of damage in the area and ended up doing damage to the venue where the concert was supposed to be. And so that concert didn't happen. So I guess I'm glad I didn't waste everybody's time streaming more about that concert that unfortunately never came to be. It would have been nice if it had happened, but I think, knowing what I know now, my part of this would have been a train wreck. And so I had a lot of learning lessons learned from that experience. And I went back to the drawing board and said, I need to rethink this before, my process before I come back to trying to do another big event like this, especially because it'll again be my first time producing something like this. And so finally the opportunity came again at the end of last year to do the Christmas concert for Houston Masterworks Chorus, and that ended up being my actual first concert that I got to record, and I just did audio for that one. I reeled it in, partly for budgetary reasons on the organization's part, but also then on my part, I was like, I think that I'm not ready to handle the video and stuff, so let's just focus on audio and let's figure this out first. So I did the recording for the Christmas concert last December for Houston Masterworks. And that was my first big concert. Although similar to the previous event where tragedy, struck right before the concert, I got a flat tire the night of the concert rehearsal, the dress rehearsal. And so I was on the way there, and of course, it being my first time ever doing a recording of this scale, it wasn't my first recording ever, but it was my first recording of like this scale for a large, ensemble. I was very nervous about this situation going into it, not knowing anything other than at least I knew the venue well, and so that worked to my advantage. But I needed to. I ended up reaching out to a couple other people in the field for help and said, do you have any advice for somebody who's doing this for the first time and does not have any chance to practice? I got one shot to get this right. So Luckily, I got a lot of really good advice from some people, and showed up to the event mostly prepared. But there was a lot of improvising that happened, and it was a very like a race to the last second. I mean, it was like minutes before the concert started that I finally like sat down, put on my headphones, and was like, oh my gosh, I think it's ready, and I think it's gonna work. And that recording ended up being really beautiful. It was a really amazing recording, and so I impressed myself with being able to pull that off, especially with it being really down to the wire and having only one shot to get it right because I couldn't go to the rehearsal. But it was very successful. But there were a lot of lessons learned, and so then I said, okay, kind of like the previous event, I went back and looked at what was my process for how I prepared, how did I pack and load up my car and everything even to get to the show, and spent a lot of time thinking about that and came up with uh, uh, I think a reasonably good process that worked really well then for the second gig that I had, which was last May, for also Houston Masterworks, um, recording their farewell concert for their departing artistic director, uh, doing a piece, Wound in the Water. Really beautiful choral orchestral work. And so that also gave me a really good opportunity to play with, um, some techniques for not just singers, or, like singers with some like light accompaniment, like the string orchestra and piano were like a crucial part of the orchestration, and so trying to figure out the right way to balance it, how to mic everything, and then eventually mixing it, and all that sort of stuff. It was a really amazing experience, and that recording was even better, I think, than the December one. And so we're going into this one coming up rather strong, I think. And so yeah, so why we're here today is because we are about a month out from the next concert that I will be supporting, which is again for Houston Masterworks, and this is for their concert on November 2nd at 4 p.m. at St. Philip Presbyterian. And they are performing Mozart's Requiem, as well as a couple movements from another piece uh, as part of that program. And so this is going to be another concert, kind of like that previous one that I had done, where it's actually an even bigger orchestra, even more instruments accompanying the choir. Of course, the chorus is still the centerpiece of the ensemble. I mean, they're the Houston Masterworks chorus. So it's really, I want to highlight them and emphasize them. But I really appreciate the challenge of being able to try to record this with like a chamber orchestra essentially. So yeah, it's gonna be a good time. So that is about a month out, and just because this is not my day job, this is just something I basically just have nights and weekends, and because I am tired all the time, I come home from work and then pass out, and don't really get much done during the week. So we've got a handful of days left really to prepare for this concert, and so it's time to really like figure out what we're doing here. So there's a few interesting challenges to consider with this concert. So the first one is that, unlike my very first concert, like I was saying before, it was at a venue that I was familiar with. The one back in May was a place that was new to me. So that was a challenge, to go to a new space. and figure out how to mic in that space and work with it and figure out how much cabling I need and stuff like that. So I'm doing that again. So this is my first time going to St. Philip. And so I went out a week or two ago. Recently. I went out recently. And met up with Justin, the director of the Houston Masterworks course. And he is also the, I don't know what his title is there, but he's the director of music stuff there at St. Philip. So he has home court advantage there, which is also nice. And I think a lot of their concerts going forward are going to be there. So this was an introduction to the venue for me, but if I continue to do things for them, then it will then have the advantage that I'll know that space better as well. So that's some of the things to consider, but the venue itself presents some interesting challenges, I think, to how we handle the situation. So give me 1 second here. Okay. So also this is a new setup that I have here. This is a studio that I've been trying to build out in my guest room for a while, and it's finally coming together. And so this isn't really like the fully finished product of this setup, but I decided that I was going to rip off the Band-Aid, and I better just, you got to start streaming or I'll get out of the habit like I did 2 years ago. So I was like, I better just do it. And I think people might be interested in like hearing me talk through what I'm doing here. So if I'm trying to watch the chat, I have I'm supposed to be aggregating the chat from Twitch and from YouTube. So if anyone's out there and they have questions along the way, you're welcome to try to ask them in the chat. And hopefully this is working and I'll see your messages. And if not, I'll check in. I'll go in manually later if it doesn't look like I have any messages and see if I'm missing out on people screaming at me about things. But okay, so we have here the score for the Mozart Requiem. So I like to go through the score for the piece ahead of time because the thing that I want to know is what instruments do I need to make sure that I need to know the instrumentation of the piece, so I need to know what I'm miking for exactly. And then there's all the question of, well, so how many microphones do you need? What kind of balance should you have? Because like maybe it is a whole like enormous variety of instruments, but you only ever play like one of those instruments at a time or something like that. So maybe it's not you're competing with everything all at once, but in this case, I think we are. And so there's those kinds of considerations to take into account. Is just at what points in the piece do different people come in and out. I mean, it's also just like I did something interesting at the concert in May where I basically I tried to get the microphone, all the different microphones kind of tuned in a way that I thought sounded good for the overall stage. And then I just left everything open all the time. And so the final recording that's in the video that's posted on YouTube for The Wound in the Water, it's actually none of the microphones are ever muted or nothing is ever faded in and out. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. One of them is that it does pick up a lot of noise. And so that's not necessarily a good thing, but I did this kind of as a challenge to myself to see if I could do it. And so I did that, and I know that I've learned, you know, that that I could do it, but it's maybe not the best way to go about doing this kind of recording, and you really should try to kind of fade things in and out when you can, and do it in a way that nobody's going to notice what's happening. So um, one of the other things that's important for classical music is that classical music recordings are different from the way that you would record a lot of other things like studio recordings, right? Because a a proper studio recording, I shouldn't say a proper one. A studio recording tends to be something where it's an extremely controlled environment down to the level of like you might have microphones on every single individual instrument and you can just tune everything. Everything is under your control. It's a very scientific thing. And so if you want to get really close up miking and get all of that like nice texture sound from the instruments and like the actual like mechanisms of playing them and stuff, that's there's that. But funny enough, I mean, a lot of that stuff kind of gets edited out because they're usually kind of considered blemishes. But anyway, my point being that like you usually close mic things a lot more. You get the mics very close to the instruments to try to get more texture from the instrument when you do studio recordings, and everything is just much more present. Everything is kind of generally a little bit louder, and so you don't have as much what we call dynamic range, right? There's the quiet parts are quieter than the loud parts in a pop recording or even like a studio recording for like a movie soundtrack or something, right? But it tends to be just a little more kind of loud, and the quiet parts aren't quite as quiet. So everything is a little more what we would say normalized, right? But the whole art of classical recording is that a classical concert live recording is supposed to capture the space. It's supposed to capture the experience of if you were there in the audience. So it should sound like what it sounds like sitting in the hall, which isn't necessarily what you hear, if you're going to a movie and you hear the movie score, because like a movie score is supposed to be immersive and big and things like that. And the concerts where the orchestras are big and immersive are impressive. But that is a more rare experience in person, and thus translates to a more, I would say, rare kind of experience that you get in classical recordings. So that's the main thing that we have to consider, is that if we want this to be a traditional classical recording, then we need to try to capture as accurately as possible. It's all about truth. You want the recording to sound as true to how it sounded in person as possible, but you can still kind of embellish things a little bit stylistically here and there, but it should generally, the overall predominant thing should be truth. To which you might think, well then, so you get a couple microphones and you put them out in the audience, and then that's it, right? But it's not quite that simple, because that's maybe 75% of the sound that you're going to hear on this recording. But microphones, this is something that has always perplexed me still to this day, that here we are in the year 2025 with all the technology that we have today and whatnot, and we still have not figured out how to make microphones that record the way that your ears hear exactly. And we don't have cameras that record, pictures and video the way that you see it actually with your eyes. So everything is always, there's always biases in everything. And so the art of doing these kind of technical things, technical arts in a way, to try to portray reality as authentically as possible, that is the challenge. Because you want people to hear. It's kind of funny in like classical recording, like you did a good job if people don't notice that you recorded it, or that that you did anything to it at all. You did your job when people aren't impressed with your work, which is kind of the funny thing, because you don't want them to be blown away by the sound unless that's the way that the experience was. So anyway, all of this to say, it's nearly impossible to get one microphone that can capture exactly what it sounds like in a space. And so you have to have multiple microphones that each do different jobs to try to help tell the complete story, but do it as minimally as possible, because you want predominantly the sound to be the recording from the front, what you would essentially like hear in the room. So we have a couple different tools at our disposal. And in my case, I have I have a whole cabinet of microphones and things, and so also I'm just gonna apologize in advance that I'm just gonna apologize in advance that because I'm still kind of getting the space set up, I don't quite have everything set up in a way that all of my audio and video is all synchronized. So I try to like get everything to match as closely as possible to the microphone in the front that I'm talking to you on, but the other views that I have are a little deceiving, or not deceiving. They're they're just not synchronized. So anyway, but oh, there we go. And then yeah, let's do that. So over here I have, this is my cabinet in quotes. So this is my road gear that I take on the road with me. I had part of this for the December concert, but it really wasn't organized and everything the way that it is now, the way that I set it up for May. That was one of the things that I made sure to try to improve to make it much more efficient to work quickly once I get to a venue and kind of get things going. So these are toolboxes that are on a dolly, essentially, so I can get to a venue. They're stackable, so I can unstack them to get them to fit into my car. And then when I get to the venue, I just take them out of the back of the car, I stack them, and I can roll the whole thing into the place. And I got everything I need for the most part right here. But so we have, in the top two drawers here are my microphones. So what I used for the front microphones in the May concert were these two. So they are both this is like my secret. It's my secret sauce, my secret ingredient. But they're the Beyerdynamic. They're Beyerdynamic microphones. This one, let me switch cameras. This one is the M160, and this is the M130. So this microphone is a hypercardioid microphone, which means that its most sensitive spot is directly in front, and it's hypersensitive directly in front of the microphone. But then it has a lot of it rejects all the sounds that are behind it better than other kinds of what we call polar patterns, different kinds of microphones. This one, on the other hand, is a more traditional ribbon microphone, which they have the strange property that they have what are called figure 8 polar patterns. And so they have sensitivity on either side of the ribbon, and then they reject sounds that are on the that are basically like in line with the ribbon itself. So you want to be in front of or behind it, and it picks up both about equally. And so you also have to be really sensitive with these kinds of microphones, because if I say, like, I wanted to record my voice and I have this pointing at me, but then I have a really loud thing that's on the other side of this microphone, well, my voice might just get totally, like, drowned out by whatever is in front of this microphone, because it's going to pick up, its sensitivity is the same in the front and back. So that you have to be careful about where you put these and how you use them. But the reason that I got these is they're designed to work together, specifically these two microphones. And so you take this one and you put it like this, so you have the ribbons are actually pointing to the sides, and then you have this one pointing to the front. And so then you can use this to pick up basically like the primarily like center of the stage, and then you use this to kind of get like accents, if you will, from the sides, from the left and the right. You can pick up the things that are on the sides, and you can mix these microphones together to get a stereo sound, and it gets you a nice even kind of coverage of the entire stage. Now this, the way that you do that though, this is a little in the weeds about how you like the mix microphones and how the math behind it and everything, but essentially the way that you do this, it relies on the signal from either side canceling each other out in a way that kind of it results in a signal that gives you this like left or right thing. But if you just have these two, it sounds really great, and you get that nice stereo pattern. But if you have a lot of other microphones on the stage that you're mixing in with the signals from this, now you start having the signals from this interfering with the signals from the other microphones, because now this microphone is trying to cancel out the signal from other microphones. And this presented an enormous challenge for me on the recording in May, once I got back to my office and was editing things there. It was a big problem. And it was primarily the soloist, because she had just a beautiful voice, but a very powerful voice. And so she was so loud that it was like her voice was getting picked up by like every microphone on the stage, which is normally what you want, especially from like an operatic soprano. But in this case, it started triggering this microphone to try to cancel out some of those signals, and it started behaving very weirdly. And so I had to be very clever about how I mixed things, and in some cases it didn't quite sound as good as I thought it could. And I don't want to risk that happening again. And so while I enjoyed my experiment with doing what that's called mid-side recording, when you record with those two microphones in that setup. Um, so while I enjoyed my experiment with mid-side recording, I wanted to do that back in December. And one of the people that I had talked to in my panic after my after my flat tire, who was a Grammy Award winning recording producer, actually, he didn't say not to do mid side, but he said you should do ORTF instead. And so I took his advice, and and it was a beautiful recording. And so of course that you would say like, oh well, then if the wise Grammy winning recording engineer said, oh, do this setup in this scenario, you would think that I would learn my lesson. But I wanted to try it. I wanted to try it because the only way that you can know for sure what's going to work and what isn't is if you try it for yourself, right? So I tried it, and I think that there is definitely some situations that I could see where this would be a really great setup to use. And the sound from those microphones, if it was just those microphones in the mix, that would have been it was beautiful. It was spectacular. If that was the only recording I had, I would have been happy with it, and it would have been fine, and that would have been probably the right answer for that situation. But I had other microphones, and it didn't give me a complete picture of what I wanted, because, as I mentioned before, like, there's pros and cons to different kinds of microphones. And so the downside of using like these two microphones is that you don't necessarily get as much even. Well, first of all, if you're relying on only two microphones they were on stage, but still, in the grand scheme of the universe, far away from all the instruments and very far from the singers, who were very far back on the stage in that particular venue, where it has this very, very deep choral shell. Yeah, it was crazy. They in that kind of a situation, everyone's really far away from these microphones, and so you don't get quite as much nuance as you would think. And so you start sacrificing things like picking up low frequencies. So like bass instruments, if you get too far away from, microphones like these, they don't pick up the low frequencies quite as well. So like there's also the fact that not all microphones pick up all frequencies the same, and they don't pick them up in the same pattern all the same. And so that's kind of where you have to that's the part where I was saying, like, we haven't found microphones that work the way that people's ears actually do. And so even though we as humans can sit in an audience and we can hear these beautifully rich orchestral sounds with all of their frequencies, and our brains can process that all, and our ears can somehow pick it all up just the right way, it's really hard to get microphones to do the same. And so instead, you have to get different microphones to do different things. So you have these at the front, and like I said, these told most of the story. This is most of what you heard on those recordings. But then I also had these, well, maybe not. Yeah. Is it this one? Yeah. These are the Omnis. So these are SE8 microphones. They're small diaphragm microphones, and they have interchangeable tips on them, so you can take the cartridge off, or capsule, and you can replace them. And so in this case, These are omni capsules, so they're omnidirectional, so they pick up. They're unlike the other microphones that have particular points around the microphones that are like the sensitive points, like the focus of the microphone. These pick up everything around them more evenly, and but so that 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 tends to be better at achieving what we're trying to achieve by having something realistic with like how does it sound in the space. So these are very, very common, not this specific one, but microphones like these are very, very common in these kinds of recording spaces, because they they do a good job of truthfully portraying the space that you're in. But they also have the advantage of they are much better at maintaining lower frequencies. And so it's the constant, you have trade-offs, right? So if you want to get some of these microphones maybe to focus on the lower end instruments like the bass, the cello, the viola, things like that, these are what you're looking for because they will pick up much more of that rich, darker tone of those instruments. But it comes at the expense of it also picks up everything around it. And so it also will then emphasize the other instruments as well. So so you have a little bit of this kind of sprinkled in for taste. So I have these. So I had these up near the cello and the bass to pick up the bass instruments. And it got a little bit of the violins as well and a little bit of the piano. But by trying to like actually put it reasonably close to the low strings, I could emphasize that a little bit more and get a little bit more of that low end. So I then ended up also kind of like filtering out the microphone. So all of the bass that you hear in the recordings basically came from like this microphone or, you know, one of the ones that I have like this. And so I would like emphasize the bass frequencies on those microphones in the recording, just because they pick it up more nicely. But then I would kind of filter out, kind of like taper off the higher frequencies from those microphones, and then use the biodynamics to get the higher, more of the high frequency stuff. So that's our considerations for kind of the front of the space. There's also that, you know, you usually want to get not just the instruments on the stage, but like you also want to get like the reverb of the space. And so like how much does the sound fill out the room? You know, you want to hear those reflections from the back of the room and whatnot. And so you get that like nice long echo going on, because that tends to just really make things beautiful. It's just something about like, I think a lot of instruments, if you really hear them individually, you may not appreciate it when you're listening to a recording or I think you appreciate it more when you're sitting next to an instrument. But a lot of instruments or a lot of singers are a lot harsher than you think that they are. And so it sounds really, really rough on your ears to like hear every little like nook and cranny of every instrument, you know, creaking and cracking, you know, and people's voices doing whatever people's voices do. That's the thing that's like in a choral sound, it's not the individual singers. You know, it's about the blend of everyone all together, and how it all just sort of like melds together, you know. And so that's really where like reverb helps you, because when you're in a space that has a nice echoey reverb, it tends to kind of like take all of the different colors, all of the different frequencies, and sort of like mush them together, and that can be bad, but it can also be really good, and it can be really beautiful. So it tends to like soften a lot of the harshness of like the raw instruments, right? And the raw voices. So so you usually want to try to get as much reverb, capture as much of the reverb as you can. So I'll often have like microphones like this just out in the audience, like actually in the audience, just to pick up like what does it actually sound like out here, because I might not use that to try to like portray the sound on the stage, but if you mix it in with the microphones that are on stage, it's going to naturally have a little bit of delay to it, and it's going to give you that kind of reverb sound, and it'll capture some of the other like reflections happening in the room and stuff like that. So these microphones are really good for that as well. So we want to get the front of the stage, we want to capture the room, but I think that, like I was saying, like there is the harshness stuff, but that's also some of the bits that give music character. Um, so here in Houston, we have this really amazing space called the Cistern. It's actually like it used to be a cistern, part of the waterworks, in downtown Houston, where all the water used to run through the cistern. Instead of like water towers, this was like before water towers were a thing, I guess. I don't know, but whatever. Anyway, I don't know the complete story of it, and you can Google it. But anyway, it's this enormous cavernous space that they no longer, because it's no longer actually used as part of the water system. They decided to preserve the space though, and it's kind of like an art installation now, because it's kind of in the middle of a park actually. And so people will go in there and they like have fancy lights and stuff, and but one of the really neat things that I did was around Christmas time I went to a concert. Around Christmas and New Year's they'll get like a quartet or a sextet of local singers who will come and perform music in there, like a cappella music, like ancient church music and stuff like that, that was designed to be in those giant, performed in those giant cavernous, French cathedrals and things like that, where, the echo lasts for tens of seconds or whatever, crazy stuff like that. And so, that was really, really cool to hear it, because that space is one of the spaces it's got to be like one of the that has like one of the longest echoes in the area for sure. But it's really cool to get to hear something in a space like that that's just so massive and so echoey that it doesn't absorb any sound, because the whole thing is just concrete, and so it's concrete, and just the sound just reverberates through this giant football field space of concrete for feels like minutes. But so that me but then I was talking to some of the singers that were performing in it later, and they were saying like, they had to be very judicious about picking what pieces they perform in that kind of space, because at some point, because the echoes are so long, you don't want to like sing chords that are going to clash with each other if you have music that changes very abruptly. And you're in a space like that where everything just kind of, it's like watercolor all blending together, mushy pea sound. You have to be mindful of that. So anyway, this is a little bit of a tangent and rambling, but yeah, so that's fun. But all of this to say that, like, on the contrary, when you're in a space that has no reverb at all, it's very unforgiving, right? So like if you sing, that's why people like to sing in like their bathroom, right? Because it's all those hard surfaces. So it's like the biggest, the water, the cistern is like the biggest bathroom you could possibly sing in. And then, you know, if you versus like, you know, screaming into a pillow. Um, it's you know, those are kind of your extreme ends there. But we tend to want to hear things that are more on the reverberant side because a lot of times this music was designed, a lot of times classical music was designed to be performed. It was written usually, unless it's contemporary classical music, it tends to be older pieces that were performed in old European churches and concert halls and things like that that have a lot of these big, reflective surfaces. And so then people had to write things that didn't sound ugly in those spaces unless you were a Stravinsky type and you wanted to wanted to offend people. So reverb is important in classical music. And so that was something that was interesting about that church from the May concert, because it was a little more of a dead space and didn't have as much like natural reverb. But I had a few microphones. I had one microphone of my own, and then the church itself had two microphones installed in the ceiling that they were gracious enough to let me plug in and use those microphones in the space. And the combination of those three microphones, just because they were far enough away from the stage, that there was just enough delay in the sound that it kind of sounded like a reverb, and I didn't have to add any artificial reverb. It made it sound more reverberant than it was. And so that was one case where I opted to not be truthful to that space because it sounded good in the space, but it would have sounded better in a space that had more reverb. And so I think that's why the recording is much more, I think the recording of that concert in May was I think the recording sounded better than the actual performance did, because I think it had a lot to do with the reverb. So anyway, but yeah, anyway, where I was going with this was that you do still also want to have some sounds from the texture of the instruments. And so you do still want to have some microphones closer to where like soloists are, right? Because you want to highlight them and you don't want them to get buried in the wall of sound that's coming from the orchestra. And so you'll tend to have microphones closer to soloists, if not microphones for soloists and things like that, so you can get their more nuanced performance. Instruments that tend to be a little softer, or don't blend, or blend overly well. If you don't want it to get just like washed over, you'll need to add spot mics on those things to capture that. And then finally, this is something that this is a little more on my personal taste, I think, versus how professional. I mean, I'm putting quotes around it. Actual professionals. I mean, I guess technically speaking, I am a professional, but I'm just saying that like I am not part of the like mainstream industry of classical recording, at least yet. But in my personal taste, and maybe it's also I'm biased because I'm a choral singer, but I often think that like choirs are not recorded well when it comes to choral orchestral works, because they tend to lean more on the side of being truthful to the space, which often does not favor the choir. In that often in bad halls, everything just sounds really muddy and it's hard to hear like the words. And like intonation is really hard to hear. Like that's something that I notice about like when I listen to recordings where people will be like, "Oh, this is a really great recording. This chorus is really good." Well, it's hard to hear that that chorus is really good because to my ear, everything just sounds very dull. Like it's hard to hear the intonation. Like it doesn't necessarily sound like people are out of tune, but it just doesn't lock in as if they were like really in tune. And it's not the choir's fault because they probably actually sang it right, or at least you hope so. Um, but I think a lot of that has to do with people tend to they'll put mics on a chorus, but it's just there again. I think more for the texture, um, and I don't feel like it. That I think that those microphones are not used as much as they should be. And so I tend to overemphasize the chorus um, in the recordings. Now, my recordings that I've done thus far have all three of them have been for Houston Masterworks Chorus as my main client, who is a chorus. So I wanted to focus on the chorus in those situations, right? And so I think that that's so sure there's that I did that somewhat intentionally because of that. But I think it's just also something that I tend to approach. I think miking the choir just a little bit differently. Um, and now technique wise, I guess I do it the same way as more or less everybody else does. You got mics roughly on each section, so then if you need to adjust the balance a little bit, you can do that. But I try to lean more towards not necessarily focusing on the sections and having so I might not use something that's more directional like the cardioids. I might use something that's a little more on the omni side because like I was saying you get more of that like the sensitivity across frequencies is more even. And so I think that I tend to lean in the direction of omni, but then just try to put the microphones a little bit closer to the chorus than maybe they would normally be. And so that way you get it a little bit more emphasized and you get more of the richness of their full like spectrum of frequencies. Um, than maybe you might hear in another traditional recording. Now, I think I should say like for those of you who might have um, who are in Houston at least and were either part of or attended our most recent concert with the Houston Symphony Chorus. Sorry, I'm a member of the Houston Symphony Chorus. So our most recent concert was doing Schmidt's, the Florent Schmidt Psalm 47. I have a lot of opinions. We're not going to get into that here. But actually, no. Okay, this is relevant because I mentioned Stravinsky earlier, and there's a very close relationship between Stravinsky and Schmidt. They were like personal friends, and there's a real relationship between their music and whatnot. And I was mentioning before about how that's one of the things that like marks modern music is this people deciding to write music that they wanted to write and not necessarily without any regard for the space that they're in. And so like that's why we had jazz evolved over time and it's known for all of its like kind of clashy crazy chords and stuff, but usually you don't hear jazz performed in a giant concert hall, right? So because that dissonance is very hard to listen to in a big reverberant space. But like if you go to a jazz clubs are very dead sounding, and so you can have these very very dissonant sounds, but the sounds don't linger in the space. And so it doesn't sound as bad when you're in one of those kind of spaces, but when you're in a big concert hall, it does. So I think that most so anyway, where I was going with this is that's why you tend to not. I mean, people enjoy it, sure. Like Stravinsky's a classic. People love to go listen to Stravinsky performances, and so sure, like maybe he's the one who figured out how to like buck the trend and do it also while still sounding good in a space like that. I don't know that Schmidt necessarily did, even though he was a direct influence on Stravinsky. So it influenced Stravinsky, but Stravinsky maybe perfected it more than Schmidt did. I don't think that that is a piece. I don't think the Schmidt is a piece that lends itself normally well to being performed in a big reverberant space. And Jones Hall here in Houston, where the Houston Symphony performs, is not necessarily, it's notoriously a rather dead space for a symphonic concert hall. So I think that that is I think that that is why when we had when they recorded our concert for the YouTube live stream for the Houston Symphony, a lot of people listened to that recording, and those of us who were in the chorus who were listening to other recordings on YouTube and Spotify or like, you know, other published recordings out there of the piece, there's only like a handful of them because it's not a very rare, it's a pretty rarely performed piece in the first place. But, you know, we were desperately trying to find pieces to like help practice with because it's such a hard piece, and it's not one that you can just sit and like play it on the piano and you're going to be able to figure it out when you get together. You need to hear all this stuff like in the context. And it was very hard to find recordings that made any of that stuff make any sense. But when we performed it with the Houston Symphony, a lot of that stuff kind of made sense, and like it didn't sound as bad as it did on all of the recordings and the way that I was expecting it to. And I think that has to do with the space, but then a lot of people listened specifically to the recording from the Houston Symphony on the broadcast, and they said that that was maybe one of the best recordings that they've ever heard of this piece in general. And I mean, not to say that we're not a great orchestra and chorus. I think that we did nail it as much as that piece could be nailed. However, I think that it kind of tended to be that in the mix for that, they tended to emphasize the chorus a little bit more. So you got a little bit more of the texture of it, and you could actually hear the harmonies in the chorus. And so it didn't, even when it was dissonant, you could hear things locking in a little bit more because the mic they tended to emphasize, I think, more of the choral microphones in that recording than maybe some more traditional recordings would. And that is why it was really hard to hear what that piece was supposed to sound like. So anyway, historically I used these are my C414s. These are the most expensive microphones I have, my beautiful gold microphones. And I put them on wide cardioid because you can actually adjust what pattern is on them. You can see they've got little drawings on the front to show you what the different sensitivities are. So like the little 8 is the figure 8, and then the big circle is just omni. But I tend to do them more on the wide side, like I was saying before, because of the advantage of the better frequency response. But I think for this space in St. Philip, this is a very, very live space. It is extraordinarily reverberant. And that is something that we have to really keep in mind here as we start thinking through this, because this is going to be something closer to like what Mozart had in mind when he wrote this Requiem. This is the space that this is more of a traditional space that this piece would have been performed. So it's going to lend itself well to sounding good in the space, but we also don't want to go too crazy with our microphone selection because we're going to pick up a million reflections, and it's going to make it too muddy, and it might not sound good in the end. Now, it's always better to have more microphones than not enough. So I could put every microphone that I own out there, record every inch of the space, and you know, and then just in editing go through and say, oh well, I guess I only needed 5 microphones or whatever. You could do that, but then you got to do the hard part of figuring out which one. The point is, the more work that you do ahead of the concert, the less you have to do later. So, and I think it's easier to do the homework up front than it is to figure out how to deal with the situation you got. So, anyway, what I'm thinking about doing is using these microphones for the soloists in the front and having them actually a little more narrowly focused, because I want to focus on the singers, but and get the texture of the soloists, but not necessarily have it be overly have the sound. I don't want to pick up too much of the strings essentially, but if I say like put these in the figure 8 pattern, it'll also pick up the space from the back of the microphone. And so by putting them in figure 8 in front of the stage, I'll get that same effect as if I put microphones out in the audience, without having to put microphones out in the audience necessarily. And so then I won't get too much of that. I'll get whatever gets picked up by those microphones, and then, you know, whatever else is on stage, but don't need to go too crazy, I think, with that. But that means then, what are we going to do for the chorus? So this is, I mean, I'm talking through kind of what my thoughts were here, you know, more or less for fun, but, you know, I can, much like, you know, on the cooking show where you can pull it out, you know, they like, oh, say, well, during the commercial, we prepared the whole thing, and here it is, it's finished. So I have a plan of what I want to use for everything here. And so let me switch cameras again really quick. Sorry that I have to deal with this kind of janky setup. Okay. So let's do this. Okay. Yeah, there we go. All right. Okay, let me get a drink real quick. So what I'm thinking is this. So in the space, we have, okay, this stage is kind of strange in that it has this, like, in the back, the back wall is like angled out. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it's like this is the back of the stage. Like here, this is up here. This is the front of the stage. So it's like this, something like this. So here's the conductor, and then this is the audience. So the audience is here, and here's the conductor with his baton. We'll draw a treble clef. You can't see that, but I drew a treble clef, or attempted to. Anyway, but this is where the conductor is. So we want to have. So I know I'm going to have in the front, I guess I didn't really get to where I was going with this earlier. I said I didn't want to do mid-side. What I want to do instead is a pattern, which is what I used in December, which is what I was told to do by somebody who's an expert, which was to use ORTF. And ORTF is a French acronym for essentially like the French Radio and Television Bureau or something. I don't remember. Whatever. That's what ORTF stands for. But it was these radio, you know, engineers that figured out this one kind of recording technique where if you have two microphones like this, but you put them angled where the angle between the tip of the microphones is like 120 degrees, I think, then it kind of mimics more closely the way that your ears actually pick things up. This is a thing that people forget about, is like your ears are not flat on the side of your head. And that's why like headphones twist when you put them on. They have a little bit of give and they're not just like stuck there because your ears are not flat. You know, the sides of your head are not flat. They're slightly angled. And that's intentional so that your ears are not just like picking up things like this. They're actually angled a little bit forward. And so the idea is that if you put these microphones at like roughly 120 degrees, and there's like a very specific, like you put them, I think 17 centimeters apart, is a very specific like measurement, but that's called ORTF. And that arrangement is considered one of the closest approximations to the way that the human ear actually listens with a microphone. Because again, remember, microphones all lie to us. And you don't ever hear what a microphone hears, and microphone hears in a way that you don't. Anyway, so we're going to do that in the front. So we'll have a pair of microphones. I'm actually going to go back with my trusty Beyerdynamic M160 and I have a second one. I actually got another one. So I have two of these now, and I will put them in the 120 degree in an ORTF pattern, and that is what we will have at the front. So I'm going to erase our little audience here because we know that the audience is there, but we have two microphones here, and I'm just going to write down here ORTF, and this is the M160. Okay, so we have a pair of those. This is our front. This is our main pair is what this is called. So now the conductor will have soloists seated, you know, I'm drawing them as stick figures here, but they will be on either side of the conductor. There are 4 in this piece. So in between 2 of them, we will have microphone here, microphone here, and these will be the C414 in something closer to figure 8. I'm going to say figure 8, right? You know, figure 8 question mark. And this is also C414. I'll know what that means later. I know that it's the same. That's what I'm thinking about doing for the front. So then we have, that'll get, so between this and these 2 mics, that's going to give us our string coverage. Now, we don't need quite as much wide coverage as like a full orchestra would, even though it's a smaller space than a concert hall, like than a concert stage. So we don't have quite as much width that we need to worry about. So I'm not worrying too much about getting what we call flanks on either side of the main pair. I think that this is going to get us most of what we need without that. And I think that, again, because this is going to be such a rich, reverberant space, I don't really need to worry as much about picking up what's happening on the sides because we're going to get it. It's going to reflect off of all these crazy things, except for the sound that goes to the back and then gets trapped in these corners from these stupid rear angled stage walls. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know who designed this church. But that's an issue. So I'll do what I did, though, in May, again, where we will have a microphone here, because we have, you know, this is the violas, and the cello. The abbreviation for that is actually violoncello. VC is the actual abbreviation for that, but this is a cello. So we'll have in somewhere over here by the low strings, we'll again do our SE8 Omni. And so then that'll get us the low strings. This piece has a harpsichord, and that'll be here-ish. None of this is to scale. I think this is probably closer, something like that. It's also over top of my violas, and I think the violas would not appreciate having a harpsichord on top of them. Sorry, violas. I have a good friend who's a violist. There you go. Okay, so then this is the... I don't know how to abbreviate harpsichord. What do they abbreviate it in here? It's also probably a German abbreviation if it is. It probably just says continuo. Doesn't really say anything. What's it say in the front? If you know what the abbreviation is for harpsichord, put it in the chat. Yeah, it doesn't say. Yeah, it just says continuo. Whatever. All right, it's a harpsichord though. I'm just gonna put H. C. Harpsichord. I don't want to put harp. Because, I mean, I'm the only one looking at this. It's not like I'm going to get confused. I know Mozart's Requiem, and I know that it doesn't have a harp in it. I just don't want to write harp, okay? All right, don't at me. Actually, do at me, because I'm looking for engagement. And so far, I only see one comment in the chat. But at least I know the chat is working now. So, thank you, William. Anyway, harpsichord. Harpsichord is an interesting one here, because harpsichords are not loud, right? That is actually, but they're very harsh. So I think that I'm gonna put a mic here on the harpsichord, mostly for texture, but it's gonna be not really used. It's gonna be subtle. It'll be kind of like a piano mic, like the piano mic that I did for May, where I actually had two microphones on the piano, and oh my gosh, it sounded so good. It sounded so good, and the microphones were actually doing a really great job of rejecting all the other sounds. So like, even though there were string players sitting right next to those microphones, right next to the piano, all I heard was the piano. I couldn't hear the strings at all in the piano tracks, and so it just sounded like a beautiful solo piano, and it sounded so good. But in the spirit of trying to make a recording that sounded authentic, like an authentic classical recording, I did not use much of it. I just used a little tiny bit of it. It's like cilantro. You don't want to have too much of it, or you're gonna get soapy mouth if you're one of those people. I don't get the soap mouth thing with cilantro. I just don't like it. I just don't like it. It doesn't taste like soap, but it's just too strong of a flavor for me personally, and I feel like people overuse it. But I like it from time to time. Anyway, okay, so for this, I am going to I have a ribbon microphone called the VR2. It's the Voodoo VR2. It's an active ribbon microphone, if that means anything to you. But it's a really great microphone that I try. It's one of the two that I used on the piano in May. And I was really, really impressed with the sound of it because it's actually a fairly inexpensive microphone for what it is, and it definitely punched above its weight class or whatever the right analogy is. I don't sports, but you know what I'm trying to say? It's a good microphone. And I think that it does very good on the string textures. It's very sensitive to the strings. So I think it'll be really interesting to hear the sound of the strings. And what I'm hoping is that I don't get too much of the plectrum sound on the harpsichord. But I can just throw the mic out if I don't need it or it doesn't sound good, because I'm gonna have plenty of other microphones in the area that'll pick up the sound. So anyway, okay, so we got these, we got the bass, we have the harpsichord, we have the violins over here, 1 and 2, and V, L, N, 2. Okay, so there we go. There's our strings. And then question mark. Now, the reason there's a question mark is because on the stage at the venue is a piano. Let me see. Sure. Okay. So if we let me do, what is this? This 2. Yeah. So here's a picture of the stage. And you can see like there's a big altar in the center of the stage. That moves. So they're going to move it for the concert. And so that's where the strings will be. But there's also a big piano immediately behind it. It's in the middle of the stage. There's no ramp on the stage or really any way to get the piano off the stage unless you get a piano mover. So that's the big question is, are they going to try to get a piano mover to come and move that piano and get it off the stage for the concert? And then move it back, I suppose, because they'll need it for like church stuff. Or are they going to just try to put everyone around the piano and deal with it? So that's a big question that I need to hear back from them on. But I think they were thinking that they might try to put like the piano maybe off to one side. So, you know, something like over here would just be the piano kind of taking up space. You know, that's kind of piano-ish. But I don't need to mic it. I'm just noting it here. That's not a very good drawing, but I'm also not a great artist, so I'm sorry that you're dealing with this, my awful drawing. So let's assume that they like kind of put it over here off in the corner, in which case then we would have the woodwinds would be kind of where they are more traditionally positioned in an orchestra, which is in kind of the more centered in front of the conductor but behind the harpsichord. They may end up going off the side of the harpsichord over here maybe. I guess it depends on how much room the violins take up. And I guess it depends on how much room the piano takes up. The question is, should I have a mic on the woodwinds? I would tend to say there should probably be one and just use one microphone and an Omni. So we'll maybe do the same thing over here. So get the sister microphone to this one that I have on the low strings and just do another SE8 Omni here. Yeah. And the rationale there being same thing in that I want to get a little bit more of the texture of the instrument, um, but I don't need to necessarily overemphasize it. So I think this is one that I could give or take on. This one, I worry that this one is gonna make this recording more muddy than it needs to be. So I'm gonna keep the question mark there because I have not actually decided if I want to keep that one there or not. You know, so so at least in, you know, there's two pieces, but in this case, the main star of the show is the Mozart Requiem. So here, but you have there's the basset horns, and then the bassoon and clarinet. Those are very reedy, and they cut. And so I don't know how much of that we really want a close mic. I think I might err on the side of putting the microphone there and then just not using it in the end. I'm going to have to hear it. I think I'm going to have to hear it. It's just, it's a tough call. I could also look at the ultimate guide, which is this book, Classical Recording, Practical Guide in the Decca Tradition, which is kind of my at least my go-to reference when I'm not really quite sure what I should do here. I've not read this whole book. I've read maybe about half of it. I should probably finish reading it at some point. But that's why I'm also only doing a couple gigs here and there and kind of just trying to figure it out as we go along. And as I have time, I read up on things, and yeah. Okay, so woodwinds. There's also brass. More specifically, we have, is it just trombone? Trombone 1, 2, and 3. Trombones. They're loud. And they probably also don't need mic'd. But I am reserving. See, I'm kind of inclined more to put a mic here, though. Anyway, I'm more inclined to put one here than on the woodwinds, even though I don't know if that's necessarily wise. But I am thinking about the WA-47 Junior. Now, this microphone it's a big boy. That's this guy. So it's big. It looks like a tube microphone, but it's very specifically not a tube microphone. This one is it's a FET, FET. I don't remember what that stands for off the top of my head. I'm not an electrical engineer, sorry. But it was they attempted to take the 47. So this it's mimicking another microphone. There's actually like a recreation of a different microphone, but they did it with very cheap parts. So I don't know. I'm mincing words here to say that I don't really like this microphone, but it's kind of a tank, and it can take a lot of sound, and so it's very good for things that are very loud if you don't care about nuance. And you know, brass is not noted for its nuance. So if I needed a microphone there, I would tend towards this one. Because all the rest of my microphones are much more delicate, or they're good sounding, or they're better sounding microphones, and I care more about their sound in other places. So that's where I'm on the fence about this one also. But the thing is, there's also timpani back here. We got timpani back here. And so, oh boy, I better be careful about how I draw that one. Let's not. All right, we're just going to say there's a timpani and there's a microphone on the timpani. I think this is where I want to actually use the M130. So this is the M130. So this is the ribbon that had the sides from the mid side that I was talking about that I had in the front back in May. I'm thinking about putting it back here. One of the reasons is because I know that Brad from the Houston Symphony, he's the one who actually first told me about the M160, introduced me to it, the Beyerdynamic M160, which is the microphones that I have in the front. And he uses them on timpani with the Houston Symphony. And so that was why I was curious about it, because I usually sit right behind the timpani and was curious about that microphone because I didn't recognize it and was like, what is that microphone and why did you choose it? And so anyway, he was the one who first told me about the M160 and how amazing it is. And he likes it on timpani. Now the M130 is not the same microphone, but it's quite similar to it. But it is a ribbon that has the figure 8 bits. So I do wonder if I might use the M130 having one face, one of the 8 lobes, pointing one front part of the ribbon pointing towards the timpani, and the other lobe kind of picking up the brass bits, so then I wouldn't need this microphone. And I just use the M130 to pick up both the timpani and the brass. But there's also, for the other piece that's being performed here is it's a I've not actually heard it, but I have seen the score for it. I don't have a printed score for it, but I have seen the score for it. And it is a Latin style work. And so it has percussion and it has guitar with the chorus, which is interesting. So there's also extra percussion bits happening back here, for which I think I'm going to have to wait until the dress rehearsal and see how this is actually set up on the actual stage to decide how I want to deploy this and or if I want to use these microphones. Because if the timpani and percussion are a little more on the spread out side, I might try to put this microphone between the timpani and the percussion and pick up both of those. And we're still going to get the trombones anyway, because trombones are loud. So you still kind of get it for free, but it's not as good. Which is partly why I was thinking, well, maybe I should put a mic here, because I'm kind of just going to get the side sounds of the trombone everywhere else. But I don't know. There's a lot of mics, especially on this side of the stage, so that does have me a little concerned that it's very heavily weighted on mics on this side of the stage. All right, what have we not talked about yet? Guitar. So there's going to be a guitar. I don't really know for sure where it is, but I'm thinking it's over here somewhere, kind of by the violins? Question mark. Off to this side. So there will be a mic on this side specifically for the guitar. For this one, this is a little bit of a bold choice on my part, because I have, so this microphone is another Beyerdynamic, and it's got this funky like alien head shape, which is kind of cool. But this microphone is the M88, and it is a more traditional dynamic microphone. It's like one that you would hold like as a singer, like if you were performing on a stage or something. That's really what this is designed for. But it's become more, I think it's more common as an instrument mic maybe than a vocal mic. Famously, this was the mic that Phil Collins used for, not this specific one. I mean, maybe this specific one, but I doubt it. This is the microphone that Phil Collins used for all of his vocals, for all of his songs, all of his recordings. So that's what this microphone is primarily for. But somebody on the internet at one point suggested using this on strings, and said that it had a really interesting sound. And so back in May, I had this on the cello soloist to pick up the cello, and boy did that sound really great. It sounded really good. It felt like the perfect microphone for it. And so I've been searching around to see if other people have tried using this on a guitar. And I haven't really found a whole lot of people that have done it, other than like, you know, people who do microphone tests. You know, they always will record a guitar and a singer and stuff, like with every microphone, even if that's not what that microphone is for, just to see what it sounds like. So people have recorded guitars with it, but like it's not like its main job. But you know, I don't have a million microphones. I don't have every microphone at my disposal that I might possibly want. I do have other options besides this one, but I kind of want to do this for the experiment and just see how it goes. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking about that one. Okay. And then the chorus. So the chorus will be in the back on risers. So I've allocated far too much space to the orchestra in this drawing, because really the timpani are like over here, I think, and perk. And this is all kind of smashed a little bit more and like over to the right, to the front. So there's not just this little like thin strip, although I feel like it's not all that far off. I mean, if we go back to our picture, do I have a different picture of what's going on back there? Kind of. Yeah, let's look at this picture. So you can kind of see there's not a lot of room. There actually isn't a lot of room between the steps behind the piano there that kind of go up to the second level of the stage. And that's primarily where the chorus will be, but there's not a ton of space between there and that back wall before it starts doing its like angle out thing. So anyway, that's where like we get this, all these like awkward, so clearly the piano is not there. So our piano is over here somewhere-ish, right? Gosh, I just had to draw another crappy piano. Anyway, but there's all this dead space back here and back here, and this is not great. And so I'm thinking I might break my rule on choir miking a little bit. So I'm going to have another pair here in the center of the chorus in ORTF. ORTF also. And these will be my LA 120s. With cardioid capsules. So much like the other microphone that I was showing, the SE8 that had the removable thing that screws off the top, the LA 120 is... I actually had them out earlier. It's the ones I was demonstrating ORTF with. They're the ones with these silver tips here. And this actually has a cardioid on it right now. You can see the little heart shape on it. Well, oh, it did actually focus. Yeah, there. It's a heart. Just trust me. Anyway, so this is the LA 120, but it also, the ends screw off. And so they can be either omni or cardioid. But I'm going to use them in cardioid, which is what I was saying before that I don't usually like to do. But I'm very concerned about this reverberant space back here. And I think that if I get something that is like omni, it's just gonna get all of the sound waves just reflecting off of these walls and pick all that up. So I think I need to have something that's a little more localized. And again, if I like to put the mics a little closer to the choir than you're technically supposed to, maybe, that'll help a little bit. It just, the only risk is that with doing something like this is that you get hot spots. And that's always, it always feels like the person in the group who doesn't know their music or has the really bad ear and is always out of tune or has really bad vibrato or whatever. That's the person who the microphone is always pointing at. It just always works out that way. So there's always the risk of exposure to something like that with this kind of setup. But I think I'm kind of backed into a corner in this one. Get rid of this and this. And this was where we had, this was the M130 for the timpani. But I think similarly, these, I'll have flanks over here. So this is an LA 120 cardioid. And then over here. Now, here's my beef with the LA 120. I mentioned that, you know, listening to the recording from May, there were things that I didn't like about it. And listening to the concert from December, there were things I didn't like about it either. The common denominator of the things that I don't like about those is the LA 120. Now, you're probably thinking, well, then why are you using this microphone? Here's the thing. I think that it sounds amazing. It's a really great microphone. However, it is a very noisy microphone. So it's not very good for picking up quiet things. So just having the microphone plugged in and turned up anything above 0, you start getting the hiss and the static and stuff like that. Or it seems to be just sensitive enough at like the right frequency to like always pick up the air handlers and things like that. So you just get a ton of noise with them. They're phenomenal microphones and they're very sensitive and they sound very good on things, but they make a lot of noise. And so that's where I had the LA-120s in the front here in the main pair in ORTF for the December concert. And boy, did I pay the price for that. Because I really wanted to, like, especially on, like, they're singing Silent Night. You want it to be quiet, and then, like, it kind of fades. Everyone stops singing, and the room just lingers, and then all of a sudden you hear, oh, it bothers me so much. It bothers me so much. Which is funny, because there are some people who love the sound of tape hiss. And that is, the imperfections in recordings that are done with magnetic tape, from back in the day, that gave that, like, distinctive kind of, like, subtle hiss that you hear in the bottom of the recording. But there are people who love that sound and can't imagine ever listening to music without it. And so they will spend all the money in the world on all of these amazing microphones, or really, see, all of the microphones I have here are all, like, budget microphones for doing this kind of work. Like, these are not cheap microphones, don't get me wrong. But these are, like, entry-level ones basically for everything on here except for, like, the C414. And even that, I think a lot of people turn up their lip, turn up their nose at in, like, recording studios and stuff. It's one of the most commonly used microphones in recording studios, but I think people use it begrudgingly because they just don't know what else to use, and so that's kind of their, like, go-to for, I don't know, the catch-all, like, whatever I don't have another microphone for thing. That isn't the SM57. Anyway, these are all good microphones, but they're not the best ones that are out there. And so people who are, like, the big time people doing this, they all got Schoeps and Neumanns and things like that. These beautiful microphones that make no sound at all. Like, you can crank up the knob on that microphone as high as it will go, and you can hear a pin drop on the other side of the stage, and it'll be crystal clear. No noise whatsoever. Those things are amazing. And so people who do this, who are, like, the real professionals, again, the real professionals, they've got all those amazing microphones. But then they're like, it's too quiet. It's too quiet. And so then they come in and add tape hiss. So that was kind of where I arrived at this situation in May, in that I still used the LA-120s on the chorus. And I thought it worked great for that because I put it closer to the chorus, like I said I like to do. And so the chorus was loud, and so I didn't have to crank it up quite as much. And then it just had a little bit of that, like, staticky, fuzz in the quiet parts. The thing is, that's where I was saying, like, in hindsight, I should have or could have adjusted that sound a little bit more to, like, follow the music, maybe. And in the really quiet parts, just turn down those microphones a little bit more, because when everything is really going, when the whole machine is churning in that May recording, it sounded great, and I think that it really added character to have the noise from the LA-120, which kind of sounds a little like tape hiss. But in the really quiet parts, like the string bits, I could really hear it, and it bothered me a lot. And it's one of those, like, I thought at the time it sounded great. It sounded great on my headphones. It sounded great in my monitors. I watched it in my living room on the stereo in there, and I listened to it in my car. I listened to that whole thing 4 times in 4 different speakers. I also watched it on my phone later and thought, like, just because that's how most people are going to watch this video probably, is just on their phone on YouTube. So I tried watching it there just to test out the audio before we pulled the trigger on it. And I thought it sounded good there. And then I came back to it, like, a month later and listened to it again, and all I could hear was that damn noise from the LA-120s, and so I'm like, it's still too much. It's still too much. So I don't know. I love the microphone. Don't get me wrong. I just have to. I have to figure out how to work with it. That's the thing. I think I've more or less covered everything on here. So we had the main pair, the solo, guitar, low strings, harpsichord, woodwinds, brass, timpani, percussion, and then the choral microphones. All in all, what we have here if I don't omit any of these, like if you ignore the X that I have here, this is 14 microphones. I have 16 inputs on my recorder. So I'm going to have up to 16 microphones, which I'm already here like, okay, I came into this saying like, really the whole idea of recording orchestras is all about minimalism. You know, recording classical music, it's all about minimal. You want to try to get as much of the like general room sound, and you don't really need that many microphones for it. So is this overkill? Probably. And I think I've already kind of highlighted the places where I think it is. I think the woodwinds probably in this space specifically, I think probably this microphone is not needed. I think probably a microphone on the brass is not needed. I do think that because the timpani and percussion are so far off to the side, and because there's a lot of neat texture that will happen there, and the fact that like the percussion kind of gets a highlight in the other piece, the movements from the other Latin piece that they're doing, I think that it's important to have a microphone there. We obviously need one on the guitar, and I think this is going to sound really good, especially if it's close mic'd. We might go a little more on the artificial side there and have it sound a little more like a studio recording. I think this will sound really cool as a maybe not a traditional classical recording. But you know, I don't do this just for myself. I think in the past, in my work with Houston Masterworks Chorus as a client, you know, Paolo, who was the music director before Justin, I think he trusted me a lot. And he was very picky about things too. And so I would send him previews of things, and he would come back with very specific comments about things he wanted fixed. But he had, all in all, very few comments about things, and so I think he tended to like let me do what I want. And I don't, and, you know, I've known Justin actually for a long time, just not in this capacity working with him with the Masterworks Chorus. So Justin, the new director, I'm not sure I mean, we talked a little bit about it when I met with him, you know, at the church when we were taking pictures and I was taking some measurements and stuff. And I asked, like, how much do you want to be involved? Do you have any specific ideas about the sound that you want or whatever? And he kind of was like, Sam, like, I kind of want to trust you and stuff, but I think he's gonna have an opinion. I think he has a vision. I say vision, but really I'm talking about sound. I think he has a sound. I think it's gonna turn out that there's a specific sound he's gonna want. So I'm gonna give him a first cut of what I think he's gonna want, just based on what I think sounds good / what I think from knowing him he would like, and then we'll iterate on it a little bit and we'll come to something. But I think from talking with him about this and whatnot, I think we're gonna go more traditional on the Mozart and err more on the side of a more kind of studio-esque type recording for the Latin stuff. Because some of this is really constrained by the fact that, like, with all of this like chamber orchestra business going on, they're not going to be able to like reset the stage, right? And so like in an ideal situation, of course, like the guitar and the percussion would be like in the center, closer together. But because they're already going to be spread apart on the stage, I think that it's going to be tough to get the sound that it should sound like for this piece if we just trust the way that it sounds actually in the room. I think they'll be able to get away with it in the live recording because of the space, because of all of the hard surfaces and the fact that it's very echoey in there. I think that it will sound like they're closer together on stage. But the reality is the microphones are not going to pick up what our ears hear. And so I think that the way that I have these other microphones set up, it's going to sound like they're much more distant from each other than they will sound like in the actual room. And so I think that if the idea is that we want them to sound like they would be on a stage as if there wasn't a giant chamber orchestra there, they would be closer together and it would sound something a little closer to studio recording, even in a space like this. So I think that that's probably the right approach for this. And I think that's what he's going to want. But we'll see. We'll see. Yeah. So I think that's about it. The only other thing I had on here was that I was thinking that I might just fill out the last two slots in the recording, or in my recorder with microphones out in the audience, because there will be some. I think that they're gonna do a processional, like the chorus is gonna be singing as they come in, maybe, and so I not only wanted to have microphones like in the back or at least like in the crowd for the room sound, but also because of the singing during the procession. To be able to pick up the singers while they're in the back and singing or humming or whatever it is that they're doing. So I think I might do that and then just not use that in the main recording, like once everybody gets on stage, but just have that there for the beginning when people are processing in. And then if I decide that I really do want more room sound, but I think that it's going to be cloying. I think it's going to be too much. So I think I'll have those as kind of backup mics, but not necessarily depend on it. In which case, these would be, I was thinking about actually doing two, and they'll be here, and actually they won't be here. They'll be out in the hall, but you get the idea, like out here. And these are going to be NT5s, Rode NT5s, Omni, because these also have replaceable capsules like the others, where you can switch out the bit, the tip, and change out what microphone it is. NT5 Omni. Okay, so we have a stage plot that I just hand drew here on our cat. It looks like a cat. Oh gosh. I promise I'm not a crazy cat person. But they are good for marketing. That's really the only reason I got the cats. It's just for the marketing. Anyway, this cat-shaped stage. What I've done in the past is I use Microsoft Visio and would actually like make an actual like schematic of the stage and everything. I did that in May. I didn't necessarily do it in December, but I sketched it out by hand, but I did it like all like with precise measurements on paper, like on engineering paper with graph paper, and did it that way. So I like to have these very specific diagrams. So I might type this up, but I think I don't have as much time now as I've had in the past when I did those. So I might also just not, and we'll just live with a screenshot of what we got right here. No. And then, but anyway, I need to get some like the measurements. So I did take measurements of the stage. And that way I can get an idea of how much cable do I need. Because So the more cable, the more long cables specifically that you have. This is something I learned at the December concert. It took forever because I had individual cables for every single microphone. And so I had many, like 100-foot, 50-foot, 75-foot cables. And it just took forever to lay out. And then to spool them up at the end of the night. Oh my God, it took so long. So what I did in May was I bought a it's called a snake. It's a box that just has, it's like a single box that has a bunch of inputs, and then it's one big cable that runs really long, and then at the end it fans out into a bunch of different little separate connectors at the other end, so you can plug that into the recorder or into your mixer or whatever, and then just run shorter cables to the box. So I think there's going to be a snake somewhere up here, like in front of the conductor. So SNK, I know what that means. And then it's got 8 inputs on it, and then it'll run, I don't know, somewhere over here. Okay. And then let's see. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 microphones, like all right here, pretty close together, all up in front. So I think all of these guys are going to go to the snake. And then I'll just say SNK on that curve so I know what that means later. So everything inside of there is going to be connected to the snake. So then I'll have really long cables going to the ones in the back of the church, but you know, it's only 2 of those long cables. And then for these other microphones, so I'm probably going to be positioned somewhere over here off of the stage. And the stage is like 30 feet wide. I think it's 32 feet wide. So like even if I had a microphone all the way over here, and ran it across the stage, that still gives me a little less than 20 feet to get off the stage and go to wherever I'm positioned. I'm actually right. Me. Even though I know that's what that is. But that is me. So all the microphones that are kind of in the back here, I can use 25-foot or maybe 50-foot cables to come to me. I think I actually have 2 snakes. Oh, I know what it is. I do have 2 snakes, but the other one's 100-foot, and I don't want to get that guy out. That's a big pain in the butt. Anyway, but if I get a bunch of short, you know, these are maybe 10, 15, 20-foot cables to come to the snake here up in the front. And then for the ones back here, then I just have 50s for these. So we're talking like 1, at worst case, right? Because this is if I use all the microphones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? Did I count that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So 7 50s. And then up in the front, we got the snake. And with the snake, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh yeah, I said there were 14 earlier, not counting these. So we'll have 2 hundreds, we know that. And then we'll have 7 25 or 20 or whatever, or 10. Maybe we'll do like, for some of the longer ones, we'll have like 4 25s and 3 50s or something like that. And I'll bring spares of everything too. So Or sorry, I was gonna say like tens, 3 10s, 4 25s, because I definitely don't need more than 25 for the snake. Yeah. Um. Why did I write that weird? I'll figure out what that means later. Or watch my recording, right? uh. So yeah. Um. I think that's a pretty good plan. This isn't quite everything I wanted to get through tonight, but I am on the tired side. I could take a break and come back and finish, but I'm not even convinced anybody is watching this at this point. So I might call it here. I got a diagram. I got a plan for the microphones. I've kind of figured out cables here roughly. That's enough to kind of get me started on what do I need to pack, because that's the big question, is what do I need to pack. Like everything that's in the my drawers over here for my toolboxes and stuff, that's all I've already got that stuff. It's always the same now. It's kind of standardized, so that's not changing. But I do bring the cables separately in another tub, and I pre-count them out, whatever I need. So then I don't just have to lug around a bunch of stuff I don't need either, which is something that I also did in December. I brought like every cable that I owned, and then was like, why did I do that? If I had a permanent like van, I really want to. I'm not made of money. If I was, I really want to get like a work van that I could leave a lot of this stuff in all the time, and not have to like load and unload stuff in my house and just keep it in the van. So then I could just keep all of my cables in the van, right? But I don't have a van, so I have to load everything up in my little in my car, which it all fits because I got an SUV for a reason, but still a small SUV. So limited real estate, and also just I'm a one-man band. More cables to bring, the more stuff I got to deal with cleaning up. So anyway, the only other thing we haven't talked about really are stands. So we're gonna, which I can do right now actually. So we're gonna have 1, 2, 3 in the back because these two microphones will be together. So we'll have 3 of the tall stands. And then another one up here because I have 4 of the tall stands. So, I don't know, tall. For the C414s in the front, I have round bases. Like the classic mic stand. Because of the steps that are there, I'll probably end up putting the mics on the mic stands on the steps. And so I didn't want to have the ones with the tripod legs. Also, just it looks cleaner in the front to have the round base ones than the ones with the big spindly legs. So we'll have round bases on the C414s. I have an extra round base that I'll put on the M88 round. These will just be the regular tripod mic stands. So over here, so we got 2. Well, we'll come back to that. So we got all 4 of the tall stands. We have the 3 round. And then what? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. 7 regular mic stands. Like the tripod ones. Um, for the harpsichord, you know what? Here, let me do this. I'll get 6 regular stands and then 1 with the long arm for the harpsichord. Or erase the word snake there. Long arm. I'll put snake here. SNK. I didn't mean to put the 100 in a box. It's just that I messed up. Okay. And that's it. I think I've more or less kind of got my packing list here. My cables are still in the tub from where I left them in May. I did not put any of that stuff away. I mean, I put stuff away, but not the cables. I haven't needed them, and they're just sitting in a tub. So it's not like they're taking up a ton of space. So I need to go back through the tubs of cables and swap out anything that isn't on this list. The snake I keep in there all the time. And then the stands, I actually, after the May concert, I built a rack in my garage specifically to hold all of my mic stands. And so all my mic stands are in the garage right next to the door, ready to go. So that's easy to just grab and go. I just need to make sure that I keep a list for like the day to make sure I have in my packing list to grab and go. Everything else in here comes along for the ride with me. Because I have 2 of the M160s, I don't have a spot for it in the drawer yet, so I need to make that. But then that would, that would pretty much, that, I think that's more or less everything that I need to figure out. I do, like I said, I will go through the score. I kind of ran out of time because I was rambling earlier. But I do want to go through the score just to make sure I know which movements, which parts of the orchestra are playing, and which ones are soloists and things like that, so I can turn mics on and off. But even if I didn't do that homework, I'm going to go to the dress rehearsal, God willing, assuming I don't get another flat tire or some other tragedy befalls Houston, like the derecho. Then I will be there for that. So yeah, I think we've more or less kind of got through our plan then. We did what we set out to do here. And I just want to, if you're in the Houston area and you're not someone in Houston Masterworks course watching this, you should go to the concert. It is, again, Sunday, November 2nd at 4 p.m. at St. Philip Presbyterian. They're doing Mozart's Requiem, and then I can't believe I don't have in my notes the name of the other piece, and it's escaping me. But it'll be good time. And then there's ballet dancers involved too, which I gotta see how that's gonna work. I don't think that's a consideration I need to make for any of the stuff that we've talked about here, because they're not going to be going up on the stage. I think they're going to be in front of the stage. But I'm trying to confine most of my stuff to either like on the stage or in the immediate vicinity of the stage. So hopefully it's largely out of the way. But anyway, yeah. If you're interested in going to the concert, you should go check it out. You can check out the Houston Masterworks. I think they're, is it HoustonMasterworks.org? It is HoustonMasterworks.org is their website, so you should go check that out. But I think that's going to do it for me. Unless anybody has any questions, I'll stick around for a minute and see if there's anybody who is saying anything in the chat. Let me get on YouTube just to be sure that there's, that it's not that I'm just not seeing the messages. And then I'll check Twitch in a second. Am I even still streaming? It says I am. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. So that's it. That's my exciting Saturday night. This is how I spend my time when it's not with the cats. It's thinking about microphones and orchestras and how it all goes together. So I think without further ado, we'll call it here. So everyone have a good rest of your evening, rest of your Saturday night, rest of your weekend, and maybe we'll do another stream soon about this or maybe about something else. Who knows? I've got a number of different ideas of things that I'd like to stream about, not just this. But, I was like, got to start somewhere, and this is something that I could do that might, like help put me out there so people who might be interested in my services in the future see the kind of thought that I put into preparing for something like this and know that I'm not just going to show up and just throw up some microphones. And also and to help Masterworks get the word out there for their concert, so they can sell a few more tickets and hire me for some more concerts. So but yeah, no, but I have a lot of different stuff I've been working on, and I want to get more into streaming, so I need to start doing it more regularly, and I haven't figured out what that's going to look like yet, but stay tuned, because I'm sure there will be plenty more, especially as I'm finally getting my business off the ground and trying to do more frequent gigs like this, especially the big exciting ones, because these are the fun ones that I love. This is what I set out to do, is to do these kinds of big concerts, and I thought I'd have to build up to it, and I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to just jump right in to do this kind of stuff, and glad that I can offer this service to organizations that might not otherwise have access to this kind of thing. And so yeah, but anyway, like I was saying, have a great evening, and I will talk to you all again soon. See you later.